There's a moment, combat veterans know it, where everything goes completely, terrifyingly silent. Not the silence of peace, the silence before something tears the world apart. Marcus Cole knew that silence better than he knew his own heartbeat. He'd lived inside it for 3 tours, and on this night, in a burning building in the middle of a Wyoming winter, with smoke eating the air from his lungs and fire crawling up every wall, he heard it again, that silence. Except this time, he wasn't going to die alone, because something was refusing to leave his side. Something that weighed 60 pounds, had a square jaw, and had been rejected by this world just as hard as he had. And in that moment, with the ceiling beginning to crack above them, Marcus made a choice he hadn't made in years. He decided to fight to live.
6 months earlier, Marcus Cole was invisible. That's what happens to snipers when they come home. They spent years being unseen downrange, and nobody teaches them how to be seen again. He'd done 3 rotations: Fallujah, Kandahar, Mosul. He came home with a Purple Heart, a prescription he'd barely filled, and a 1-bedroom rental on the edge of Casper, Wyoming. A place so flat and cold the wind doesn't just blow through you, it reminds you that you're hollow. He didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch, didn't talk to his sister, didn't eat before noon, just sat, still and precise the way only snipers are, watching the highway from his window like a target that never came. Meanwhile, outside the chain link of the county animal shelter, a brindle Pitbull with a torn ear and a limp that nobody had ever bothered to treat had been returned for the 3rd time. 3rd time. 60 days on the kill list. The kennel staff had stopped naming dogs they knew wouldn't make it. But someone had written something in marker on his kennel card anyway. Just one word: ghost.
Marcus didn't go to the shelter to adopt a dog. He went because his VA caseworker left a pamphlet on his kitchen table, and he had nowhere else to go that day that required him to speak to another human being. He told himself he'd walk through, prove he was functional, and leave. The shelter smelled like antiseptic and fear. Dogs barked in every direction, desperate, frantic, the kind of sound that hits a veteran in a very specific place. Marcus kept his hands in his jacket pockets and walked with his head down. And then he heard nothing. In a corridor of noise, one kennel was dead silent. He looked up, and there was Ghost, not barking, not cowering, just watching him, eye to eye, completely still, the way a sniper watches. Marcus stopped walking. The dog didn't move. For 45 seconds, Marcus counted. Neither of them breathed differently. The kennel worker came up behind Marcus and said, "That dog hasn't made a sound in 11 days, not one." Marcus said nothing. He just stared at Ghost, and Ghost stared back like he already knew everything, like he'd read every page of Marcus's file and decided to show up anyway.
He didn't adopt him that day. He left, drove home, sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes, then drove back. He told himself it was practical, that a dog would force him to have a schedule, a reason to get out of bed. He didn't let himself think it was anything more than logistics. The paperwork took 14 minutes. On the drive home, Ghost sat in the passenger seat and didn't make a sound. When they got to the apartment and Marcus opened the door, Ghost walked in slowly, nose low, reading the room. He stopped in front of the couch, looked back at Marcus. Marcus pointed to the floor. Ghost stepped onto the floor beside the couch and lay down. That night, Marcus woke at 3 a.m., the way he always did, heart hammering, sweat cold against his neck, the dream that never changed playing behind his eyes. He sat up in the dark, hands shaking, and Ghost was already there. Not jumping on him, not whimpering, just sitting at the foot of the bed, watching, present, like he understood the assignment was guard duty and he wasn't leaving his post.
Marcus Cole had been one of the best. 41 confirmed, 600 days downrange across 3 deployments. He could read wind, elevation, and human behavior at 1,000 yards. But none of that prepared him for the mission that ended his career.
He doesn't talk about Kandahar Province 2019. He's talked about it to exactly one person, a grief counselor he saw twice before he stopped going. He watched his spotter, his best friend since their second week of basic training, die through a scope from 300 meters away. He had a shot. He was told to hold. He held. Danny Reeves bled out in an alleyway while Marcus's eye was pressed to the glass. The inquiry cleared him, completely, officially, but Marcus never cleared himself. He came home, and the guilt didn't arrive like a flood. It arrived like water damage, slow, behind every wall, and by the time you see it, the structure's already compromised. Ghost didn't know any of that, but dogs read bone-deep pain the way the best snipers read terrain, and Ghost read Marcus the first day and chose him anyway.
Ghost had his own damage to unpack. The limp came from a left hip that had healed wrong. Nobody had ever taken him to a vet. His torn ear was an old wound, long since closed. He flinched at certain sounds, raised hands, the word no said too sharply. He'd been someone's property before he was abandoned, someone's training project before he was returned. Marcus took him to the vet on day 3, not because the VA pamphlet suggested it, because Ghost had started running alongside Marcus on his 5 a.m. walks. Walks Marcus had started taking specifically because Ghost needed them, and Marcus had seen the way he favored that left side on cold mornings. The vet said the hip was manageable, said Ghost was approximately 4 years old, said he was in good shape all things considered. On the drive home, Marcus said out loud to no one, 4 years of bad luck and you're still here. Ghost put his paw on Marcus's arm from the passenger seat. Marcus stared at the road. His jaw worked. He didn't say anything else, but he started eating breakfast that morning. First time in months he cooked something.
It happened gradually, then all at once, the way everything real does. 3 weeks in, Marcus started talking on their walks, not to anyone who could answer, just narrating. The neighborhood, the weather, old memories he'd locked in rooms he hadn't opened in years. Ghost listened with his whole body, ears forward, eyes angled up, occasionally glancing at Marcus mid-stride like he was confirming he was still following. Marcus told Ghost about Danny one morning in February, standing at the edge of a frozen pond in the park, breath steaming in the air. He told the whole story, start to finish, the mission, the order, the scope, the silence after. He cried, not dramatically, not with his hands over his face, just quietly, the way men who've been taught not to cry eventually do when it can't be helped anymore. Ghost sat beside him in the snow and leaned his full weight against Marcus's leg, not performing comfort, just adding his mass to Marcus's gravity. When Marcus finished talking, he scratched Ghost behind his good ear for a long time, and Ghost let him. And somehow, between the two of them, the weight was fractionally less.
People in the neighborhood noticed. The veteran with the Pitbull. Marcus had been the man nobody made eye contact with, the one who walked the edges of spaces, who stood with his back to walls, who never lingered. But Ghost changed the geometry. People stopped to ask about him, Ghost's name, his age, the tear in his ear. And Marcus answered, briefly, carefully, like a man remembering how conversation works. There was a retired Marine named Earl who walked every morning with a thermos of coffee and a corgi named Sergeant. Earl started timing his walk to intersect with Marcus's. They never talked about their service. They talked about dogs, about the cold, about the price of propane. And somehow, 3 sentences at a time, Marcus started having something resembling a life in public. Ghost was the bridge. He did what Marcus couldn't. He was open. He greeted Earl's corgi with absolutely no pretense. He made people smile, which made Marcus visible in a way that felt, for the first time, survivable.
There was one Sunday in March that Marcus would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. He woke up at 7, not from a nightmare, but because Ghost had gently placed his chin on Marcus's chest and waited. They went on the longest walk they'd ever taken, almost 5 miles. out past the edge of town where Wyoming opens up into sky and prairie, and the silence is the good kind. Marcus brought coffee in a thermos. Ghost investigated every inch of fence line and dead grass and frozen creek bed with absolute scientific intensity. At one point, Marcus sat on a boulder and Ghost climbed halfway into his lap, all 60 pounds of dense muscle and square head, and Marcus laughed. A real laugh. The first in he couldn't remember how long. It came out of him like something that had been waiting behind a closed door for years. And when it didn't sound broken. It just sounded human. He sat there in the March wind with a Pitbull in his lap and the sky going every shade of blue it knew how to make. And for 1 full hour, he was okay. He was genuinely, quietly okay. Marcus had a neighbor named Decker, 32, loud and burning through the end of a bad year in ways that spilled into everyone around him. He'd had a Pitbull once. A dog animal control had removed 6 months before Marcus moved in. Decker didn't like Ghost, didn't like Marcus, didn't like the way the dog watched him when he stumbled home at 2 a.m., acting like the parking lot was his personal problem to solve. The complaints started small, noise violations Marcus never actually committed, a call to animal control claiming Ghost was aggressive, which went nowhere because Ghost had never so much as growled in the direction of another living thing. Then one night, Marcus noticed his front door had been tried while he was out, the lock scratched in a way that was fresh. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Ghost stood beside him, nose reading the air, ears forward, every muscle in his body tuned to the same frequency as Marcus's. Whatever was coming, neither of them had to say it. They both already knew. The quiet before the thing. They'd both survived it before. The question was whether they'd survive it together. It was a Tuesday in April. Decker had been drinking since afternoon. Marcus heard him in the parking lot at midnight. Loud, erratic, the sound of a man trying to set fire to his own life. Marcus looked out the window. Decker was near his truck with a gas can. Marcus had his phone out before he finished the thought, already dialing. But Decker saw the light in the window, and Decker made a decision in the way that drunk, broken men make decisions. Fast, final, and terrible. By the time Marcus smelled smoke, it was already inside the walls. He moved without thinking, 30 years of muscle memory. Grabbing nothing, just moving toward the door. Ghost was already at it. The hallway was filling. They went low together, the way Marcus had taught himself, and the way Ghost seemed to already know. 3 apartments down, an elderly woman named Ruth was calling out through a closed door, disoriented, terrified. Marcus broke the door, got her moving. The ceiling cracked. Something above collapsed, and a burning beam came down across the hallway behind them. Marcus turned back. Ghost turned back. The exit was 10 feet ahead, and Ghost, 60 pounds of every bad thing that had ever happened to him and every good day they'd built together, turned around and ran back through the smoke toward the sound of a cat yowling inside Ruth's apartment. He went back. For a cat he'd never met, because that's the thing about dogs who've been abandoned. They understand exactly what it costs to be left behind. The building didn't fall, but 3 units burned. Decker was in handcuffs before the second fire engine arrived. Marcus got Ruth to the paramedics and turned around before anyone could stop him. They stopped him anyway. 2 firefighters physically held him back from the entrance while he counted seconds, and the smoke poured out in great gray columns into the black Wyoming sky. He stopped fighting them, not because he gave up, because snipers learn you don't burn ammunition when there's nothing you can do. You wait, you watch, you calculate. He stood at the perimeter in the cold, and he watched the building with the same eyes that had watched 1,000 yards of foreign terrain, and he made himself breathe. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after he'd been pulled back, an eternity, a firefighter emerged from the side entrance carrying something. Something brindle. Something 60 pounds. Something utterly still. Marcus was across the perimeter tape before anyone registered he'd moved.
The next 12 hours existed outside of time. The emergency vet was 40 minutes away and Marcus drove it in 28. Ghost had smoke inhalation, burns along his left flank. He was alive, barely, but with a stubbornness that the vet said she'd genuinely never seen. "This dog," she said at one point, "does not want to leave." While Ghost was in surgery, the parking lot of that veterinary clinic became something Marcus hadn't expected. Earl showed up with his thermos and his corgi and sat beside Marcus without saying a single word, just present, the way Ghost had always been present. Ruth arrived in a borrowed coat, holding the cat Ghost had gone back for, a 14-year-old tortoiseshell named Bessie, and she sat across from Marcus and looked at him with the eyes of someone who understood they owed a debt that can never be repaid in any currency that exists. A young couple from the building came, then the kennel worker from the shelter. She'd heard somehow the way news moves in small cities. By midnight, 7 people sat in the waiting room of that veterinary clinic for a dog that most of the world had written off. The dog who'd been returned 3 times. The dog named Ghost. Present after all.
Ghost made it through the night. The vet came out at 4:47 a.m. and said words Marcus didn't fully process. Stable, responsive, strong heart, remarkable animal. And Marcus nodded very slowly and then put his face in his hands for a long time. Not grief, the other thing. The thing that comes when you've been certain you were going to lose someone and then you don't. When Marcus was finally allowed back, Ghost was on a padded table with an IV line and bandaging along his left side, and his eyes opened when Marcus came through the door. Not dramatically, just opened. Found Marcus's face immediately, the way he always did, the amber eyes. Tired now, a little distant with whatever medication they'd given him, but present, unmistakably, stubbornly present. Marcus sat beside the table on a 3-legged stool and put his hand flat on Ghost's chest. He could feel the heartbeat, slow and steady and real. "You absolute idiot," Marcus said quietly. "You went back for a cat." Ghost blinked. Marcus laughed once, broken and whole at the same time. "Yeah," he said. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Ghost came home 6 days later. He walked through the apartment door on his own, slowly favoring his left side more than before, but under his own power. He went straight to his spot beside the couch and lay down like he'd never left. Marcus had repainted the apartment while Ghost was recovering. Not much, just the kitchen wall, a yellow that didn't belong in a place this cold, but that he'd chosen anyway. He'd called his sister for the first time in 16 months. She cried. He let her. He'd made an appointment, a real one, not the kind you cancel, with a new therapist the VA had recommended. He told Earl he'd join him for coffee on Saturdays. Small things, the smallest possible things, but the kind of small that builds, the way all real things do. Marcus Cole came home from 3 wars and couldn't figure out how to be alive. And a dog that had been abandoned, mistreated, returned, and scheduled for death looked at him through a chain-link fence and decided that this broken man was exactly worth staying for. Ghost didn't save Marcus with some dramatic act, though yes, eventually there was a burning building. He saved him the slow way, the real way, one morning at a time, one walk, one frozen pond, one laugh on a boulder in the March wind. They were both strays who found their way home. And home, it turned out, was just the 2 of them, in a small apartment in Wyoming with a yellow kitchen wall, a food bowl on the floor, and all the time in the world.